we go. We'll sync up.
Thank you for being here. We know your time is precious, so we're just going to dive right in here. We're going to talk about the budget, first of all. So Seattle faces a projected $250 million budget deficit over the next 2 years. That means big cuts and or new taxes. So what are you going to take aim at first?
This is a great question, and budget and revenue, city revenue, is something that I've done a lot of work on over the years. So back in 2020, I led on designing and passing the Jumpstart Payroll Expense Tax, which is our city's landmark tax on wealthy corporations, and it's really how our current mayor has been able to balance the city budget for the last 4 years. But you're right, we still have a very large budget deficit. Seattle voters will have a couple of opportunities coming up this fall to help to close that deficit through passing a B&O tax restructure, which should raise another $80 million or so a year. But moving forward, we are going to need to make some tough decisions. And I really believe that the city needs to both spend the revenue that we have as effectively and efficiently as possible. So that is going to mean doing a full review of all the programs we're funding. Maybe there are things that were well-intentioned when they were first passed, but are not, fulfilling that purpose. So we need to make sure that we're spending our money well. And we also are going to need to look at new progressive revenue. We still have a very regressive tax system here in Washington state where the lowest income households are spending the most of their money in state and local taxes. So we do need to call on the wealthiest households to pay their fair share.
The mayor has said you've only dealt with a $200,000 budget in your past. Is that a fair criticism?
I think that I've probably spent a lot more time combing through the details of the city budget than our current mayor has. And as I mentioned, I led on passing the Jumpstart tax back in 2020. So I have extensive experience with our city budget. I also think it's important not to exaggerate the kind of experience that Harold came into office with, right? When he stepped into office, he had been a council member, right? Managing a few staff. Before that, he was at his law firm, maybe managing a few paralegals. So people come into the mayor's office with all kinds of different experience. But yeah, the budget is, it is critical that we are spending our money well. And that is something that I have a lot of experience with in my work with the city budget process over the last 14 years.
Efficiencies probably aren't going to claw back $250 million. Mm-hmm. So when you're looking at difficult decisions, is there anything that you can point to right now where you've already seen that's probably going to be cut back?
Yeah, this is an interesting question, and I do want to point out that $250 million, assuming that the B&O tax restructure and also the Families Education Preschool and Promise Levy pass this fall, that deficit should come down somewhat. So hopefully it will not be $250 million. We're also waiting for another budget forecast in October. But you're right, efficiencies are not going to take care of all of it. In terms of what to cut, I do think that in the area of homelessness spending, we can spend our money a lot more effectively. So that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to spend less, but it does mean that we're going to get more from the money that we spend. In terms of things to cut, well, this is kind of a small example, but I do think that Harold's political consultant has gotten enough public money for the last few years. Just to make a joke.
We'll move on. Crime and safety. So, Katie, according to a recent FBI report, Seattle's violent crime rate has dropped recently precipitously, but it is still right around now double the national average. We just had a drive-by shooting just a few hours ago, I believe on Capitol Hill. On top of that, we're the third worst in the nation for property crime, petty crime, car thefts, car prowls, that kind of thing. It's a whopping 185% of the national average. You've heard those numbers before. So in a minute, can you sum up your plan, your policy plan to make Seattle a safer place for the people who live here and do business here?
Yeah, this is very important, and it's something that as I've been campaigning around the city for the last 7 months, it is clear in so many neighborhoods people do not feel safe, right? There are a few things that I'm looking at doing better. So there was an audit last year about the city's kind of approach to gun violence and gun violence prevention. And what it found is that we are not following best practices. We do not have a coherent, strategic, evidence-based framework for addressing gun violence. So that's something we need to do better at. And there are really good models out there. So Baltimore and Boston recently have had dramatic drops in gun violence, and especially in youth gun violence. So we need to look at what they're doing. We need to work with all of the community organizations that are doing gun violence prevention work, because those are the right players to have at the table. They're doing great work, but we need that city leadership to make sure that we're getting the results that we want to see. We also need to meaningfully address the homelessness crisis and the parts of the public safety crisis that are related to homelessness, related to unsheltered homelessness and drug use, and that we can do much better on as well.
A lot of people correlate adequately staffed police with public safety, and I believe your quote was, "We need an adequately funded SPD." My question is, and I just looked up some numbers just a minute ago, the current budget for the SPD is $457.9 million. That's up almost $103 million from 2022. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Are police adequately funded now? Would you change that in any way, up or down?
So I think that funding, like kind of dollar numbers, is not the right way to think about this problem. The question is, what are the results that we want to see for people on the ground? And that means that if you call the police, if you need them to come, they should arrive in a timely manner. And if there's a situation that does not call for a police response, for example, a mental health crisis where the right responder is a social worker or mental health professional, you want that person to come in a timely manner. It also means that we need to have the police capacity to investigate serious crimes in a timely manner. So we really need to think about those results that we want to see for people on the ground, and then ask ourselves, how do we get there? So we absolutely do need to keep hiring police officers right now, because we do have a staffing problem. But there are other things we need to do to make sure that adding more police officers doesn't just mean an ever-increasing police budget. So one of the things I want to focus on is civilianizing roles that our police do not need to be performing, right? And that's not just alternative response. That's also things like taking down reports of property crime, or responding to non-injury traffic accidents. These are things that some other jurisdictions have successfully civilianized, and that allows the police to focus on policing. So there's progress that we can make in this regard that will make sure that we're getting those results without an ever expanding police budget.
Those examples that you're giving are all in response. What about prevention? Do you think that a bigger police force plays a role in that prevention, and what does that look like?
You mean in prevention of crime?
Crime. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and again, I think that part of this is it's not just about the number of officers, it's about how we use those officers, about what kind of models of policing that we're using. And one complaint that I've heard a lot as I'm going around the city is that people see officers kind of sitting in cars, but not really walking on the street and having those relationships with people in the neighborhood. And I really think that as we're thinking especially about addressing hotspots of crime and drug use, like downtown, like in Little Saigon, like in several other neighborhoods around the city, we need to think really carefully about how our police are working with street outreach teams, service providers, business owners, people in the neighborhood, so that we're kind of taking this problem-solving approach to street disorder and crime that can help to stop violence from escalating before it starts, and that can stop some of these real hot spots of illegal activity from forming in the first place. And so that is a preventative role for police, where there's more of a presence, and it's not like round up everyone and put them in jail, but it's enforcing kind of standards of behavior in public space. And occasionally that is going to involve an arrest, but it's also kind of a deterrent, and it's also just kind of breaking up that activity before it really forms and becomes 50 people on the sidewalk downtown.
But when you're talking about response times and keeping that to a short time, and also having officers getting out of their cars and doing community policing, that relies on having enough staffing to have that time. So when you look at adequate staffing, what's the number? What's the metric that you look at to specifically say we have enough at this point?
I mean, again, I think that we need to figure that out as we get there, right? We're going to know that we have enough when we're getting the results on the ground that we need. So at the moment, we do need to keep hiring more officers because we're not getting those results that we need. So it's kind of, we're hiring more people, we're training more people, and at the same time, we're working on civilianizing those roles that police don't need to be doing so that the police we have can focus on policing. And we are working on using our officers as effectively as possible so that, for example, the more we're able to actually prevent incidents before they start, the less requirement there is for responding to incidents. So it's kind of a moving system. There's not like a magic number of police that we need, but for the moment we do need to keep hiring more officers.
Accountability is obviously going to inform your policy as it relates to public safety and funding the SPD. Do you think in the post-DOJ world, now the consent decree has been lifted, what's your view on accountability? Is it where it needs to be?
We still have a lot of progress to be made on police accountability. And if you look at the statistics about use of force, right, we still have a very extreme racial disproportionality in who force is being used against by our police. And a lot of this goes back, so in 2017, there was a police accountability ordinance passed by the Seattle City Council. And at the time, it was considered like a gold standard. I think some other jurisdictions have since surpassed that. But unfortunately here, major elements of that ordinance are not actually implemented because they've been superseded by the SPOG, by the police contract, right? And so this has to do with how our mayor and council are negotiating that police contract. We need to demand that those accountability measures are actually in place. And that's something that I will prioritize as mayor because right now our police accountability system is really still broken. So just to give an example, right, the standard of evidence that is required to hold an officer accountable for misconduct, right? Here, it's a very high standard of evidence, higher than best practice. So we really need to make sure that we are improving our police accountability system, and we have a long way to go, even though the consent decree has been lifted.
Let's talk about the homelessness crisis. The latest point-in-time count shows King County has seen a 26% increase in homelessness from 2022 to 2024. A lot of money, a lot of effort has been put into addressing it. Is it time to abandon the King County Regional Homelessness Authority?
That's a great question. And one of the reasons why I got into this race is being so disappointed in how the current mayor's administration has handled the homelessness crisis, right? As you mentioned, we have far more people sleeping unsheltered on our streets today than we did 4 years ago, and we have actually lost shelter capacity in Seattle every single year the current mayor has been in office. So we have like 2 homeless people on the street for every 1 shelter bed, and our shelter network is 95% full on any given night. So if you go outside and you wonder why there are people camping in the park, why there are people sleeping in the doorway of a small business, it's because there's nowhere for them to go. So we need a strong emphasis on opening more emergency housing and shelter, getting people inside with the support, with the treatment, with the case management that they need to be successful there. Now, the King County Regional Homelessness Authority was set up some years ago to pioneer a regional solution to this problem, and we absolutely do need a regional solution. That agency has been very troubled, and that's partly from poor leadership from the mayor's office, because the mayor sits on the governing board, has a very big stake in how that agency is governed. At this point, the answer for me is I don't know. And I think we need to try to make that agency work because there's an important, as it is, we do need a regional solution. We need close collaboration between the city and the county and other cities around the county. But it is true, absolutely true, that right now it is not working. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And as mayor, I'm eager to dig in and try to make it work. And if it's not going to work, then we need to take a different direction.
You've mentioned that people need to have the proper kind of help. Yeah. We know homelessness does not exist as a single problem, that there's a lot of overlap with mental illness and addiction. Treating those are much more complicated and they're much more expensive. So how do you have the right services, to your point, without the price tag going way up?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that we are going to need more resources, but also we can do a lot better with the resources we have. And one of the things, as I've been talking with people in the homelessness sector who are working for service providers over the last 7 months, and honestly through my whole career, because I've done a lot of work on this subject, one of the things that I always hear is there's so much frustration because the different parts of the system are often not joined up in the right way. So instead, like what we need to be doing is creating realistic pathways for people from the situation they're in into stability inside with support. Realistic pathways. What we have right now is a system of dead ends. So, maybe you have an overdose, maybe you're in the hospital, and now Harborview is discharging you back onto the streets. Like, that is a moment where we should be able to get someone inside and stabilize them and keep them inside, right? And there are so many cases like this, right? Like, I've done a lot of work on public transit over the years, right? So we have, outreach workers on transit, and someone's causing a problem, and then they're just back out on the street. So we have all these cases, or even in drug treatment, right? Like, someone gets into a drug treatment program, and then there's nowhere for them when they get out of that, and they're back on the street. And so as much as possible, it's about taking the systems we have and joining them up so that we are creating those realistic pathways. And that's really like the city's role. That's the role of leadership, is to convene all of those stakeholders and redesign kind of how the different, there's so many different players in this system. We need to redesign how they are working together so that we are creating those pathways. Now, the real bottleneck, as I mentioned before, is the lack of shelter and housing that we are putting people into. And so that is the part where we need to really focus on expansion. That will at some point require new resources, but we can do better with what we have too. So for example, it was in the news recently how in the affordable housing sector, we have vacancies, right? We have empty studios in affordable housing buildings, right? Because those rooms were being designed for people at 60 to 80% AMI. We really need them for people at 0 to 30%, the lowest income level. So I envision a municipal rent voucher program where we are buying down the rents in those units so we can fill those vacant units, right? We have this resource here. We need to utilize it. So I think we can do better with the resources that we have. And then yes, at some point we will need to seek new resources. That's a combination of local action and also working with the county and the state.
You hear people get a little frustrated,
Yeah.
saying that they believe that an approach to dealing with homelessness needs to be carrot and stick. You talk a lot about carrot. What about the stick? For somebody who refuses treatment, for somebody who doesn't want to be inside, for somebody maybe who doesn't have the capacity to make a clear decision because of mental illness or because of addiction, what do you do with those people?
Yeah, so this is a complex topic, and there's a few things to say. The first one is that we have models that are proven to work for encampment resolution that do get people inside voluntarily. And so, for example, during the pandemic, there was the Just Care partnership between several nonprofits that succeeded in resolving large encampments downtown. And they got people inside. And this was continued under WashDOT's right-of-way program over the last few years, which was resolving encampments near state highways. And basically, well-designed help, when you go to people with that, and there's a little relationship building involved, but the vast majority of folks sleeping outside will accept well-designed help that works for them when it is offered. So we can make a lot of progress without forcing anyone against their will, right? Now, forcing people against their will, that's kind of a state level issue in terms of involuntary commitment. There's a very complicated conversation there. But the other thing that we can do at the local level, people who are have substance use disorder, addicted to drugs, right, usually are engaged in illegal activity of one sort or another, right? When there is an arrest, there is an opportunity there. Instead of throwing someone in jail and then they're back out and no one is helped, right? There's an opportunity for diversion, and that is kind of a little bit of a stick approach, right? Because you've arrested someone, and so the opportunity is, instead of booking and going through that court process, here's the other path, right? And that involves treatment, services, case management, and that also is proven to work. We have the Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion Program, LEAD, which is nationally recognized for its success. And so we need to invest in that and scale it up. So we have a lot of tools that we can use here, if we do that intelligently, to get the vast majority of our unsheltered homeless folks off the street.
So it's fair to say that your philosophy is the people who refuse services are just getting the wrong offer. Is that right?
Not all of them, right? I mean, I think there are going to be some tough cases, but I think a lot of people who people perceive as refusing services, they haven't been offered the right thing in the right way. And the fact is, we just don't have the power as the city, even if that would work, to kind of round people up and put them somewhere, right? But we can do a lot better with the tools that we have, and that does involve this kind of diversion approach, right? Where there is a role for police and law enforcement in that, right? Yeah.
May I ask about, you proposed 4,000 new units over the course of 4 years. I think that I heard a quote, maybe from you, that it would be about $500,000 per unit. How do you pay for that? Where's the money come from?
So $500,000 per unit is the cost right now to build new housing. build new housing in the affordable housing sector. It's very expensive. I am not proposing that that is how we're going to create these 4,000 units. So what I'm envisioning, probably about 1,000 will be tiny homes, right? And that is actually relatively very cost-effective way to put people into shelter. It's also the kind of shelter that unsheltered homeless folks often are like, yes, please give me a tiny home, right? And so in that sense, the city needs to work on siting. We have nonprofits which can operate these tiny house villages successfully, that's proven. And we have lots of empty tiny homes sitting in lots in Inner Bay and Soto that have already been constructed, and they just need to be sited. So that's a relatively cost-effective way to get a lot of people inside fairly quickly. It does take some time to stand up the villages. But another big part of my proposal does go back to what I was mentioning before about these empty units in the affordable housing sector. So we have lots of empty units in affordable housing buildings. How can we get people in there with support? And that, I probably don't have time to give you all the details, but basically it's using the space that we have more effectively.
Okay. I'll get to this really quick. Smart Asset recently released a study of how much money you need to make a comfortable living in Seattle. For a single adult, $128,000. For a family, it's $330,000. Census data shows the median household in the city is lower than both those numbers, $120,000. I'm sure you're very familiar with all those numbers. What are you prioritizing in terms of your policy to make this city more affordable?
Yeah, I'm personally very familiar with these numbers as someone with a daughter, a 3-person household that's definitely not at those numbers. So, the housing crisis is a really big part of the affordability crisis, right? The cost of housing, the cost of rent, and let alone like trying to buy a home in this city. And so one of my big focuses is tackling the housing crisis. There's not one answer to that. We need to do a range of things. Part of this is making sure that the private market can build lots more housing around the city, right? Part of the reason why housing is so expensive is we've had this population boom over the last 10, 20 years, and we haven't had our housing supply increase to match. So we need to make sure that building can take place. Social housing, Seattle voters have twice said overwhelmingly that they want the city to develop, to build permanently affordable, publicly owned, mixed income housing. So I'm committed to making that project work. So that's a couple of the things that we need to do to address the housing crisis. Childcare is another huge issue, again, personal for me as a mother of a 2-year-old. And as mayor, I will convene a blue ribbon commission of childcare experts so that we can create a roadmap for solving our childcare crisis, because families need support, right? Childcare is a public good, right? We're all harmed when families do not have the ability to put their children in childcare. And even for a working parent in the summer, right? School lets out, and what are you supposed to do with your 8-year-old, right? Like, you have to work all day. It is very expensive to put your kid in summer camp all summer. So we need to do better, and that's going to be working at the state level too, because this is a problem not just in Seattle but around the state. But this is something where I think the city really needs to take leadership, because part of the reason why the median income now for a family in Seattle is so high is that lower income families have been displaced. They can't afford to live here, so they end up moving out. And we can't have that. We can't have a vibrant, thriving city where working families cannot afford to live.
You've been accused of having a plan without a price. We've heard that. How do you pay for all this?
So childcare, there's a couple of parts of it. So one, it requires a lot of money, right? And that's the subsidy. And that's where I think we need to work at the state level. We also do need to look at, can we raise some more money here locally so that we can do more in the city? But part of it too is thinking creatively, right? Because it's not just about subsidy, it's also about supply. Like, it's really hard to find childcare. And so I think the city can do a lot more to locate spaces where we can do childcare, and maybe work with early learning programs like at the University of Washington or at other universities, find ways that we can somehow facilitate low interest loans for people who want to start childcare facilities, right? There's creative ways that we can increase the supply of childcare in a way that will also help to bring the cost down. So there's a lot of things we need to do. Some of it costs money, some of it's more just about leadership. But yeah, I do have ideas for how we can raise new progressive revenue here in the city, and I'm not afraid to do that as well.
You mentioned working with the state. The governor, at least, has left little room for any new funding in the way of taxes or anything like that. He's talking about balancing his budget and really cutting back on spending. So how realistic do you think it is that you would be able to get state help on a big project like childcare?
You know, I think that this is going to be a continuing conversation in the state legislature, right? The governor is one obviously very important player, but we have many legislators who represent districts, and in those districts are many working families that are struggling with these costs. So there's going to be a lot of pressure from the bottom for the legislature to address this crisis over the next few years, and I think the city has a role to play in helping that to happen as well. So I think this is going to be an evolving conversation, and it's not just childcare, right? We're seeing the threat of cuts to Medicaid, right? There's going to be a big conversation about healthcare in the legislature. And you know, the fact is, like, we have a lot of needs, and again, we still have this extremely regressive tax system where the wealthiest are not paying their fair share. And so I think this conversation around taxes is going to continue, and you know, I'm hopeful that we can make progress.
How are we doing on time at this point?
11:35.
Okay. And you have to be over there at 11:45, is that right? Do you anticipate this being a long...
It's just across the street, right?
Right,
Yeah.
but do you anticipate this being a long conference?
Probably not.
Probably not.
I was going to say the latest we would be able to begin this again.
I have to go work with the crew after this, so
Okay.
Can
Jeff's all
we get to facing great? Are we at 6? Where are we?
Yeah, but we
Okay,
have
we
to
could
go
do a little more.
Okay, so you guys have another 20 minutes.
Another 20 minutes? Okay,
That
we can
works.
do this. We
Yeah.
can do this.
I think it's absolutely possible.
Yep.
Okay, okay.
Do you want me to talk faster?
No. You're doing great. We at 6?
Yes, that's
Okay.
you.
So Mayor Harrell says that you've never led anything of substance, only running a nonprofit with a tiny little payroll, only one employee. You might be overwhelmed by a budget of, you know, billions instead of hundreds of thousands. What's your response?
Well, first of all, as I mentioned before, like, let's not exaggerate the executive experience that the mayor walked into the office with. But yeah, I mean, my work over the years, which I understand the mayor doesn't have a lot of respect for, is as a community organizer and a coalition builder. And you know, with respect to the mayor, I have managed large teams of staff and volunteers. They're just not people who work for me, they're people who worked with me, right? I'm not sure he knows very much about what it's like to lead a large coalition, but I'm talking about bringing together 50 organizations from around King County. In a coalition to try to increase housing stability, prevent evictions of renters during the pandemic, right? And we succeeded in passing legislation in 8 different cities around King County, including Seattle, to better protect renters. How did I do that? With a lot of help, but basically coordinating the labor of all of these organizations, staff and volunteers. So you know, I think that is very relevant experience. And honestly, I think that the kind of experience that I've built up over the years as a coalition builder, as a community organizer, is in a lot of ways a lot more relevant to the job of mayor than if I was off managing a Fortune 500 company, right? Because I've built those relationships. I know the players. And I think that kind of knowledge and experience is extremely important, you know, coming into a position like this. And you know, what I've been able to do over the years, again, this is all teamwork, and that's what, you know, the mayor's job is about, assembling that team of people that's going to lead the city. But you know, what I've done over the years has, like, I've passed legislation that puts money in the pockets of working people every single day around our region, right? Raising the minimum wage in several different cities around King County, passing the Jumpstart tax, improving public transit, winning reduced fare transit programs that benefit tens of thousands of riders around our region. So this is like transformative legislation. And you know, I don't think that we should minimize the role of advocates and organizers on the outside, because this is legislation that career politicians like our mayor would not have touched with a 10-foot pole unless there was that pressure from the people.
Let's talk about our situation as a sanctuary city. The Trump administration has threatened action, as we all know, against sanctuary cities, including Seattle. His son just recently called Portland and Seattle both crap hole cities and suggested that the National Guard may come rolling in at some point. At the same time, Seattle gets federal funding for everything from supportive housing to addiction services to plans to add more trees throughout the city. So how do you balance that, and what is your approach for working with the current federal government?
Yeah, I mean, I think the bottom line is that we stand up for our values, right? We are not going to capitulate to overreach from the federal administration. And I think we can learn from the examples of cities where Trump has sent federal agents in, right? Los Angeles, DC. They didn't go into Chicago, right? So I think the more that our city can build relationships with those other cities, learn from their experiences, study the way that the legal processes have unfolded in those cities, right? We need to show that we are united here, right? We are not alone. And so as long as the city is working in lockstep with the county, with the state, as long as within the city we are united, we will become a less attractive target for the Trump administration. But we need to absolutely be ready, right? We need to be ready with the lawsuits. We need to be ready with how our police are going to respond. And I think we can do that.
We already update? Okay. World Cup. World Cup is coming. By next June, July, this area is going to be filled with people from around the world. The windfall is expected to be $1 billion. It's a magnitude in the order that's going to dwarf any Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. So in a World Cup scenario, and just envision the World Cup is here, how does Seattle look under your leaderships vis-a-vis your opponents?
Yeah. I'm actually really excited about this. Soccer is my sport, so I am really looking forward to the World Cup and to the chance to show off our city and to welcome people from all over the world to Seattle. There's a lot of opportunity there, but also we really need to be prepared. And so I would say that homelessness response is one big area where my approach is going to differ from my opponent's, right? We've seen the way that he's handled the homelessness crisis during his term, including when the MLB All-Star game came, right? And that was basically, well, we need the streets clean, so we're just going to sweep everyone away. And then they go to adjacent neighborhoods, and it's harmful both for those people and for the city. So in the first 6 months of my term, leading up to the World Cup, I'm going to have it's going to be an extremely high priority to meaningfully address homelessness in the downtown core so that we are actually moving people inside as opposed to merely sweeping them away. So that's one big difference. I also think that we need to make sure that the investments that we're making in these games are going to be of permanent value to Seattle residents, not just temporary spending money for the space of a few weeks.
At the same time, you mentioned MLB and also the Taylor Swift concerts. When people went, I heard them saying, oh my gosh, for once, things were under control and clean in that area.
Yep.
So you're talking about long-term change, but in that short-term, very attention-intensive, those weeks, will you make sure that that area is clean, is safe? What will you do to make sure that it is sparkling?
Absolutely. I am talking about those 6 months leading up to the games, having a focus on those hundreds, right, not thousands, hundreds of homeless folks who are around downtown and making sure that we are opening emergency housing and shelter and getting them inside with the support that they need in time for the games.
I don't remember what that was. Oh, but that was a different scenario. But Gary did ask specifically, how would World Cup look different under you versus Harold?
So I was talking about how the approach to downtown would be different. You mean how the games would? I mean, we would win.
We don't know who's going to play here.
Sorry, I didn't mean to be flippant.
How about, the mayor talked about public safety.
Yeah.
He was concerned about that. How would you address that under your leadership and your policy? You're talking about having a lot of first responders potentially for crisis situations that are not armed, not traditional police officers. How, in terms of public safety, there's going to be a lot of people here.
Absolutely.
How would it look different under your leadership?
I think that probably on this point, the mayor and I share the goal of everyone who attends the games being safe, everyone who lives in Seattle being safe. So I'm not sure that there's a difference in the goal here. Yeah, I think we're probably pretty aligned on that.
You good?
Yeah.
Okay. We made it to the finish line here. Last question for you. Yeah. People are getting to know you very quickly, but still don't know a lot about you. Tell us something about you as a person, not a politician, that gives people insight into who you are.
Well, a lot of my identity these days is wrapped up in being a mom. I have a 2-year-old. I actually went through my life kind of not expecting to have children, and now I have this amazing little person, and it's wonderful. It's delightful, and it makes me see the city with new eyes as well, right? And in particular, it gives me a much greater appreciation for our parks and our playgrounds. I live in an apartment building. I'm a renter, and I'm also a daily transit rider, so I'm always on the bus and the train, often with my daughter, and I love it, right? I love being out in public and just the interactions with strangers and conversations that you have on the bus, and that's kind of the lens through which I see the city, and what I would want to bring into the mayor's office is just that experience of someone who's out and about every day. We need more public bathrooms, right? Like, that's a personal experience for me, like riding the train with my daughter, like, oh my God, where's a bathroom, right? So yeah, that kind of motherhood perspective is something that's really important to me at this point.
Let me push a little bit more. What's something that would surprise us about you?
That would surprise you. This is the kind of question that I never know the answer to. I'm like, what would surprise people about me? Oh God, help. What is it? I've never been to the top of the Space Needle.
What?
Is this going to lose me the election?
We can make that happen.
Right?
Our next conversation will be at the top of the Space Needle.
Hey, that's a deal. That's a deal. We can make that happen.
I think so. You mentioned soccer. Are you a soccer player?
I used to be, years ago when I was in school, not like serious or anything, but in Seattle, I used to just play like pickup soccer games. Sometimes you'll go to Cale Anderson or Green Lake and you'll just see people just playing soccer. So I was one of those people at one point, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you
appreciate
so
it.
much.
Yes.
Really appreciate it, and hopefully we're not making you late for
No,
your
we're good.
other
We're on it. We'll
commitments.
get there. Yeah, no.
Okay, wonderful.
Wow.
And we will make this happen. The next time we talk to you,
Yeah,
it's going to
let's
be in
do
the
it.
space.